I'm Doreen Binder, President of the League of Women Voters of Portland, and we'd like to welcome you to our Voter Education Forum. Sorry, this is... the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that works to help citizens make informed choices in our elections. We do not endorse any candidate or political party, but rather, we give voters the information they need to select a candidate. Membership information is available on our website and in the table at the back of the room. We appreciate the support from MetroEast Community Media, Paloma Clothing, the Multnomah Bar Foundation, the Wise Foundation, and the Carol and Velma Sailing Foundation. Plus, we'd like to thank Multnomah County government for the use of this room. If you have not yet registered to vote, the last day to do so will be October 16th. You can contact your county elections office, or you can register online with the Oregon Secretary of State. Ballots will be mailed out beginning on October 17th. Tonight we will be having a panel discussion between the Portland City Commissioner's race, and we'll also be discussing two ballot measures, Measure 103 on groceries and a Portland Measure 2301 on clean energy. Thank you.
All right, we turn now to our forum for Measure 26201, Portland's retailer surcharge for clean energy projects. I'm your moderator, Linda Mather. Please remember that MetroEast Community Media alone is authorized to record this forum. Audience members may not use any type of image or sound recording device during the forum. Measure 26201 would require Portland retailers with total annual revenue over $1 billion and Portland annual revenue over $500,000 to pay a 1% surcharge on gross revenue from retail sales within Portland. Proceeds would be placed into a new Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. Certain sales of groceries, medicines, healthcare services would be excluded from gross revenue. The measure would create a new Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Committee, which would recommend fund grants to Oregon nonprofits for clean energy projects and clean energy jobs training. We have two speakers with us this evening to talk about the issues. They are Andrew Cohen with the Portland Business Alliance and Con Pham with the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon on behalf of the Portland Clean Energy Initiative. We will follow the same format we've been following with a 1-minute opening and closing and response to questions. The timekeepers are in the front. And again, audience, if you have questions, please raise your hand for your file cards. So we will begin with your opening statements. Andrew.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. First off, thank you so much for being here. You could be anywhere, and you're choosing your time to spend it with us and to inform yourself. This is what democracy is all about, so I'm grateful that you're spending your time. And here on behalf of the Vote No on 26201 to oppose the gross receipts tax that is being proposed. And I feel very grateful to be able to be here because I feel very passionately about this. I moved to Portland in May, and this is one of the first big issues I've had to tackle, and I can tell you I'm proud to stand in opposition to it because a gross receipts tax is a regressive tax on people that can least afford it to pay for a program which currently exists on a statewide level. So I'm very concerned about what this will do to people and the ability to afford Portland. And we are here to tell you that opposing this is standing on the sides of people that can least afford to bear the burden of this tax. So please vote no on this, and I'm looking forward to an engaged dialogue.
Con.
Good evening, everyone. We live
Is your red button on?
Yeah, we just have to be close to it.
There you go.
Hello, can you hear
There
me?
you go.
Okay.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. Do I get my time?
Sure.
Okay. We live in a time of increasing economic inequality, and we see the results of this inequality on the streets of Portland every day. Portland is at a crossroads, and like our country, we have to decide what kind of city do we want to be. And this November, we have a choice to decide what kind of values we want to embody. Nationally, we see the Trump administration slashing environmental protections and appointing climate deniers and giving huge handouts to the wealthiest corporations in the form of trillion-dollar tax cuts. But it doesn't have to be this way. Portland has the opportunity to take a stand and make these wealthiest corporations pay their fair share. We can take positive actions on climate change and be a model for other cities. The Portland Energy Initiative will allow us to create living wage jobs, grow our economy, and close the widening gap between rich and poor. Thank you.
Okay, and you get the first question. In Oregon, energy programs are typically funded by utility customers or by government-sponsored tax rebates and incentives. Is there any reason to expand the funding sources for these programs?
Sure.
Go.
Thank you. So we do have existing energy efficiency programs, but we know that the Energy Trust of Oregon's programs are only available for a small, for about half of the community. Half of Portland's residents are actually renters. And even of those who own their own homes, most homeowners don't have the kind of upfront capital that you need to invest in rooftop solar in order to qualify for the rebates and incentives offered by these ETO programs. So we just simply, even if we tried to tweak the Energy Trust of Oregon, it just wouldn't be enough. We simply don't have enough resources to invest in the kind of rooftop solar and energy efficiency projects we need to meet our climate goals. And don't renters deserve to enjoy the energy savings from rooftop solar and energy efficiency? This is a community-driven initiative that will help increase weatherization and create new investments for our community.
Andrew?
Great. Actually, on this point, we happen to agree. We believe that the Energy Trust of Oregon and the public purpose charge, which, just to be clear to everybody, is 6% on your energy bills and 3% as well from your gas bills. It isn't working. That isn't actually proper observation, and it needs to work better. So we'd say we'd agree on this point. What we don't agree on is to create a consumer tax that then hits particularly Portland and this city, which is already unaffordable. No question about it that the Energy Trust needs to be reformed, and I think we should be working together on reformation as opposed to imposing a new tax on people. Again, a consumer tax is regressive. It's mom and pops who'll be paying this. It's the people that are sending their children to school with a spiral notebook that will now become more expensive because of this tax. So you have to make a real clear choice here. Should we reform an existing program, which isn't working great, or invent an entirely new program and fund it using a regressive system that will hurt people it's actually intended to benefit?
And Andrew, you get this one. What projects would be completed with funds from the measure? Can you give some examples? Why are they needed?
So there's a good question. So it's unclear entirely all the good that can come of this or issues, the things and projects that can come of this. It is intended for energy efficiency and job training, which again already happens through the Energy Trust of Oregon. So the projects are actually very similar. So this is why we think this is a redundant program. So we are inventing something locally that already exists. This could be air conditioning units, weatherization programs, rooftop solar, and the such. And again, I think it goes back to the question of why we are creating a consumer tax for this purpose. I think we could all agree that when we look on our streets and we see the homelessness issue, that perhaps that's where we would rather spend such an intense tax to fund. So I'd really ask people to think about where the source is coming from and why we're using that money, and asking the people that can least afford to pay for it to fund weatherization projects with a system that already exists.
As organizations like mine that are representing the most underserved communities, we spent 2.5 years crafting this initiative to make sure that it wouldn't impact the most vulnerable and that costs wouldn't be passed on. The City Club of Portland conducted their own independent research and found that there are no credible studies to show that there would be any impact on this surcharge, and that's why they endorsed. And on the issue of housing and homelessness, homeless service providers like Join and Human Solutions have all endorsed this initiative because they understand that the best way to keep people from being homeless is to help them afford to stay in their own home. And this initiative would allow us to weatherize their homes, to reduce their utility bills, and create good jobs. So that's why housing and homelessness providers and groups like mine that represent some of the most underserved are voting yes on this initiative.
Next question, Con, asks for a lot of numbers here. So, how much money would this measure raise per year? How many people would receive job training? How many jobs would be created?
Great.
Money, people, jobs.
Great. So our estimates show that this initiative will raise roughly $30 million for clean energy jobs projects, including rooftop solar and weatherization, prioritizing renters and low-income communities who are normally locked out of those kinds of projects. We have a 9-member grant committee that would decide on these projects, and so so that would be the accountability mechanism by which we would determine the project. So we haven't yet determined the exact number of jobs created because it depends on the kinds of programs that they will create.
Andrew?
Yeah, so estimates about this tax is that it will create $80 million worth of revenue, which is an enormous sum. And just back to something that was said earlier, with respect to the Portland City Club's report, it is uniformly understood by economists and tax policy experts that a consumer tax and a gross receipts tax is passed on directly to the people that are buying goods and services here. And one more thing too, it's not just the consumers, it's small businesses. Small businesses buy products from places like FedEx, delivery services, accounting services, banking services, which will all be more expensive now because of this tax. So when you think it's just about the big corporations, I can tell you fundamentally it is not about the big corporations. It's about the people that have the least ability to afford to pay this tax and small businesses. And $80 million handed over to what is effectively an unelected board doesn't seem like a sensible system to deliver on the promises that this measure purports. And I would say that it actually is not doing that. Thank you.
Andrew? Are the existing efficiency and renewable energy programs sufficient to meet the city's climate action plan goals?
I think we can do a lot more. I really appreciate, and again, I go back to say that I actually really, we agree that the current system is, that provides weatherization projects isn't sufficient to do that. So absolutely a point of agreement here. There's a few things in place. Again, reforming the Energy Trust would be the first step. The governor's made commitments on a cap and invest program that's happening right now that will also impact the business community and consumers that we are exploring and we are supportive of in some form. So I want to say that there's a lot happening on climate change, but putting climate change on the backs of communities that can least afford to do it isn't fair, it's not right, and it's regressive. And going back to the issue, it's a small business issue fundamentally. If you really want to stand up for the affordability, for fairness, and being able to deliver on energy efficiency programs, going through a consumer tax isn't the way to do it. It exists, we have a program to do it, and we can change it, make it better, and I will commit our organization actually to working very, very hard to improve the current system in place because it's the right thing to do, but this tax is not.
Con.
So I think we can all agree that climate policy is important and that we need more renewable energy projects at a much larger scale than we currently have. And right now, there are not a lot of proposals on the line about how we can fund those investments. So right now, Trump is attacking a lot of the fundamentals of our climate protections and climate policy. So we really can't wait for reforms and tweaks at the state level to take action locally. So this initiative will really complement some of the policies you mentioned at the state level. And it will also show the country that there is still possible to take local action at a time of attacks at the federal level. And to the issue of regressivity or passing down the costs, if you follow that logic, then Trump's recent tax cuts of trillions of dollars, which was essentially a 40% tax cut, we should have enjoyed the 40% price cuts, and we've yet to feel that in our pocketbooks. Thank you.
Okay, and you're going to start us with, how would this program be affected if the state legislature passes a carbon reduction bill?
Good question.
This is a perfectly complementary bill to the statewide carbon reduction bill because while their policy is tackling industrial emitters, our policy, they don't touch consumption. They don't touch the greenhouse gas emissions that are embedded in the global supply chains from these multinational corporations, manufacturing in China and shipping goods into our city, like Amazon and Walmart, who are representing the largest opponents to this measure. So we see it as perfectly complementary to be able to look at the whole life cycle of carbon emissions in order to take the urgent climate action that we need.
Andrew?
So I happened to sit on Monday morning with the governor on the Cap and Invest program and the climate change initiatives that she's proposing and the legislators in support of. And I can say that this is a broad-reaching program that the state is considering. This covers transportation, utilities, building and construction. This covers a broad, every level of carbon emissions across the board. So I can say unequivocally that program will impact climate change substantially, and we are very eager to be at the table to consider how we can make that work. On top of, and that program in particular is a very business-friendly program. She's designing it correctly. What this is, going back to the original point, it's a redundant program handing over an enormous sum of money to impact very few people, borne on the backs of those that can least afford it. It cannot be stressed enough. We pay a lot of taxes in the state, but put aside that, it's just hard to live here in Portland. It is getting more expensive. This makes it more expensive. This makes every spiral notebook more expensive.
Andrew, start us with, whom will pay the tax? Can you give examples of high and low income organizations?
Sure, let's start with your backpack. Every time you send your child back to school, if you shop at Fred Meyer's, that 1% tax will be passed on to the consumer. Every economist agrees what a gross receipt tax does in principle. There is no disagreement about this. I will go back, the City Club did issue a report. They are not the economists that weigh in on this matter, and the economists agree unequivocally. So this will be borne by the person going to shop for their back to school programs, which everyone knows. I have a 17-month-old at home, and I can tell you this, looking forward to school days. But every single time you go to shop for your child's back to school services and all the stuff that goes in their backpack, it will be more expensive. It will be that coffee shop that needs banking services from US Bank. That's who's going to pay this. So if you're wondering who's going to bear the burden of it, those are the people that will. So you have to ask, are they worth it, or are these programs that we are unsure about the climate change that they'll deliver more important? I think that's the unequivocal question here.
Con?
Corporations are always going to say that this policy is poorly written and that it'll hurt the people who are most vulnerable. But we know that, they say that when it doesn't serve their interests. And their mission is not to help the families who are most needy make their ends meet. It's to maximize profit for their shareholders. These corporations aren't trying to help consumers. They're threatening them. We would love to see investments and real community investments in energy efficiency and rooftop solar and in underserved communities that are struggling to pay their utility bills and that are struggling to stay in their homes. And this initiative will help make that possible.
Here's a long question. The measure would fund projects by imposing a surcharge on large retailers with gross revenues exceeding $1 billion nationally and $500,000 in Portland. What would prevent those retailers from spinning off their Portland stores as separate entities that were then no longer part of a chain with $1 billion in sales and thus no longer subject to the surcharge? What would happen to the number of projects and this measure could create, and the number of people who could be trained? Con?
So if these major multinational dollar corporations were to spin off their, I'm a little confused about whether they were to create new local businesses that no longer had any connection to.
No, I think they're trying to play with the idea that if it's supposed to be $1 billion nationally and 500 in Portland, let's divide some of that up so they no longer qualify by the numbers.
Oh. Yeah, it's then quite. it is a small group of people who make over $1 billion, but we found that we support this initiative because Walmart makes well over billions of dollars, and so we trust that it's very difficult for Walmart to spin off and, create a small Portland store. And there was a second part to your question. Can you repeat that?
Well, the assumption is what potential will be lost? What would happen to the number of projects that right now you're assuming will be funded and the number of people who could be trained?
The corporations will always find ways to change their accounting measures to try to get by, but we're confident that there will be some impacts, but that would just decrease our investments in renewable energy.
Andrew?
Sure. So, really interesting question. First off, we always keep talking about corporations as they're out there. First off, there are people that work there, our brothers and sisters, moms and dads, and our children. So keep that in mind. And then most importantly, I would say there are some interesting concepts that were mentioned. One, this is a pass-on tax. So this isn't digging into any big corporation's profits. So I think if you think that this is getting it to the big corporations, it is because it's not. It's simply not. It is being passed on. So this isn't digging into their wallets, this is digging into your neighbors' wallets. And then an interesting question about spinoff. I'm less worried about spinoff and more about companies' choices on how they will invest and where they will invest. So now we have a Portland City consumer tax, the first in this state, right? And all of a sudden you have a choice where you're going to build your next store and where you're going to employ the next group of people. Why do it in Portland? So I think there's some very serious risks to saying you may put things on the outside of Portland because of this tax.
And Andrew, would you start us with what administrative mechanism will be needed to collect this tax? How will it all work?
Actually, that's a very good question. First off, it's complicated, again, because of the nature of a gross receipts tax and tallying the total amount of sales in the Portland city and making sure you're hitting the right sort of quote-unquote consumer. And the definition of consumer is very unclear in the way that this is written. So I think the administration of this is also a deeply concerning issue because this is an unelected board that will distribute these funds to non-for-profits. And I think there are some really good non-for-profits. I think I'm sitting next to one right now who is very good doing what they do, and that should be commended. And we really do commend the purpose of this initiative and the ballot measure. We agree with climate change. It's just like a gross receipts tax. Economists agree it's a pass-on tax on consumers. We believe in climate change. We follow the science on this. So we happen to agree on that. And I think the concern really is handing these resources, $80 million, over to an unelected board. That bothers me, and I think it should bother a lot of people when it comes to making sure that the resources are delivered in the right way.
Thank you. We spent, as I said, 2.5 years crafting this initiative to make sure that it would be a transparent and accountable process, because we too, as communities that have been always left out, believe that we need accountability and transparency. So we modeled this initiative after the Portland Children's Levy, which funds early childhood education and has been a resounding success that was recently renewed by Portland voters. The commission, we are forming a 9-member grant committee whose members have to have expertise and experience in the kind of renewable energy and energy efficiency projects that this initiative will fund. So they'll also be supported by technical experts from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability that is responsible for implementing the city's climate action plan. These are the ways that we will ensure that all the decisions made will have to be completely transparent, and they're accountable because the city commissioners will have to make the final approval and they are elected.
Thank you. And we come now to the closing statement. And Con, if you would go first.
Sure, thank you. So this November, the people of Portland have a choice. Do we side with the wealthiest corporations like Amazon, Walmart, Comcast, and US Bank, who have already donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to fight this initiative, which supposedly isn't going to affect their wallet at all and is just going to be passed on? Or do we join the people's movement that includes the NAACP of Oregon, Oregon Food Bank, Business for a Better Portland, and the League of Women Voters? Our coalition represents hundreds of thousands of Portlanders who share a vision of Portland that is resilient, equitable, and prosperous. At a time when many of us are feeling overwhelmed by the onslaught of attacks by the Trump administration against our environment and working-class families, this initiative is Portland's opportunity to show the nation that there is a better way. We can train our workers, weatherize our homes, and generate clean energy right in our own backyard. Everyone here tonight can join us in this movement. You can volunteer. Thank you.
Andrew?
Great, thank you, and thank you. So we agree there's a choice this November. It is not between Walmart and Amazon. It is between your neighbors and the people that will have the most difficulty to afford to pay this tax to fund a program which currently exists and just needs reformation. And we stand together with our colleagues that would be open to reforming the Energy Trust of Oregon. And our message should be very clear on this, that Portland is becoming more and more expensive. It is actually the challenge of our time across many municipalities in this country, where cities are becoming more expensive. And those that have been around in these cities are finding it more and more difficult to stay in place, to stay in their homes, to be able to send their children off to school, to be able to have a good life and middle income and a good middle income class lifestyle. And I have to say that this is really that difference, whether we keep Portland affordable for the next generation, or whether we make this an unaffordable city that's unequitable. So stand with your neighbors who will now be paying more every single day, and for the small businesses that will be hit by this tax as well. Thank you so much.
And my thanks to the speakers for your cooperation and your help, for the audience for your questions, and many of you have been here all evening, so thank you. You've heard a lot of information tonight. Thanks also to MetroEast Community Media for the recording and all the volunteers. Please check our website, lwvpdx.org, to view all our forums and for TV replay information. For more election information, pick up our nonpartisan voters guide either here at your local public library, New Seasons Market, or Meals on Wheels Dining Center. For similar information, go to vote411.org. Election Day is November 6th. As in all Oregon elections, you will receive a mail-in ballot. If you don't, check with the County Board of Elections. Ballots must be mailed back early or delivered to an official drop-off site anywhere in Oregon, no later than 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 6th. The postmark does not count. That's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you for watching. Those of you on TV, thank you for being here. Thank you most of all for being informed and for sharing this information with your neighbors, friends, and family, and making sure that they vote, because we know that every vote is important. And please, thanks to our two speakers.